So I wanted to start off by assuring you all that yes, you did read the title of my talk correctly. I am here to talk about getting excited about climate change. I imagine that's not a message some of you would expect to hear coming from somebody who works in wildlife conservation and who has spent her PhD research and entire professional career focused on trying to understand how the Earth's climate is changing and what the consequences might be for wild and human communities. A lot of my friends ask me, how can you stand to work on climate change when you're confronted with so much bad news? Because there is a lot of bad news out there. How many of you here have seen a documentary or read a news article about the potential effects of climate change on Montana or other parts of the world? So a fair number of hands. Now, how many of you would say that after hearing that information, you felt excited? So many fewer hands, and that doesn't surprise me, and we're not alone. Because while not all Americans are up in arms about climate change, over half do say they are concerned. And 4 in 10 Americans say that they feel sad and helpless when they think about climate change. Now that really concerns me, because being down and overwhelmed and depressed is not a place from which we draw creative energy for tackling difficult problems. So I do want to see more people getting excited about climate change. Excited in terms of energized, the way that I feel when tackling a difficult mountain hike. It can be long and hard, and I do not enjoy every step of the way. But I'm excited to be out on the trail tackling a difficult task. So I am excited about my job with the Wildlife Conservation Society, where I get to work with conservation organizations, public land managers, and private landowners to try and help them prepare for and cope with the effects of climate change. And a big key is trying to move towards a more proactive, problem-solving mindset about this issue. And I think a key to making that mindset shift lies in looking closely at how we as individuals, as organizations, and as a society cope with change, and whether we can use those changes as a motivating force for action. Because let's face it, we all know change is hard. We all face small and large changes in our personal and professional lives that can sometimes be difficult to deal with. As I've been preparing this presentation, something happened to me this past summer that I think serves as a good metaphor for how I try and think about climate change in my conservation work. And it happened while I was on vacation with my family in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York, at the family cabin that we've been going to for over 30 years. Here's a picture of us at that cabin, myself, my brothers, my parents, a cousin, and a family friend. Judging from the height of the shorts and the length of the socks, probably the early 80s. But this summer, my parents sat us down to have a heart-to-heart talk about whether it really makes sense for us to go all the way to upstate New York to gather as a family. Most of my family lives in the Boston area. It's a long 6-hour drive, and the cabin's getting too small for our growing family. So they asked the question, maybe we should look for a new place to gather as a family. I was just devastated by this conversation and in tears at the idea of letting go of this place that means so much to me. But when I sat back and thought about it some more, what I realized is what I really care about is having a place where I can connect with distant family, explore nature with my kids, and relax. And when I pared it down to those essentials, I realized that I probably can find another place where I can get those things that's more convenient for our family at this time. And so the way that I tried to move beyond that initial feeling of sadness and loss to trying to get excited about the idea of a new change in my personal life, I think is emblematic of how I try and think about the effects of climate change in my conservation work. Because in the same way that I have a strong emotional connection to our family cabin, many of us have strong emotional connections to the landscapes that we live and play in. And those connections are often embodied by the specific plants and animals that we see when we go hiking or rafting or driving around the area. And when we learn that climate change could negatively affect some of those plants and animals, like the native Yellowstone cutthroat trout that may no longer find warmer waters suitable, or the wolverine that dens in high elevation snowpacks that are dwindling, or the white bark pine trees that are getting hammered by insects that thrive in warmer winters. When we learn that we may lose some of those plants and animals from some of our mountains and streams, well, that's not news I get excited about. But I try to step back and look at that change in a new way. Because I think we have an overly fixed sense of this thing belongs in this place that is deceptive, because that has not always been the case. The landscape around us has not always looked the way that it does today, for both natural reasons and because of human activities. If we were to go back several tens of thousands of years ago, we would see plants and animals dominating western United States that are nowhere to be found today. Like this wild cat that looked a lot like a cheetah. They call it the American cheetah. It's one of the reasons why they think pronghorn antelope run as fast as they do today, to escape this speedy predator that's nowhere to be found in North America today. So we know that big changes can happen. And we know that humans are fundamentally shaping and influencing the landscape around us. And then we bring climate change into that picture. And it's just yet another layer of change on these dynamic systems. Changes in climate that are projected to occur at a faster rate over the next 100 years than at any previous time in human history. And while as a global society, we may be able to influence and control the amount of climate change we experience because of the role that human activities play in causing it, I, as an individual, trying to inform conservation decisions here in Montana, have little to no direct control over the changes that are coming our way. So I think it's essential that I try and get ahead of that wave and be proactive in thinking about what changes may be coming and how we can strategically target our conservation to continue to achieve those outcomes we're striving for. And a big part for me is moving away from thinking about all change as good or bad and thinking about it more along a spectrum, where there may be some changes that while we don't love them, we can live with them. And some impacts from climate change that if we look at them in a new light, we might actually see opportunities that we can embrace. And yes, there will be those aspects of climate change that we will not accept. But as long as we can break down our understanding of those impacts in a more nuanced way, it allows us to then channel our excitement and our energy towards tackling the specific problems or questions of when and how are we going to try and fight those changes that we will not accept, and when and how might we play a role in shaping the changes that we cannot resist, so that we can hopefully maximize the opportunities that they bring and minimize the negative effects. Now, the good news is there are already examples underway of conservation practitioners bringing this kind of strategic thinking on climate change into their work, right here in our backyard in Montana. So with those Yellowstone cutthroat trout that we expect to be negatively affected by warmer waters and other effects from climate change, well, there's a collaboration of scientists and managers from federal government, state government, and conservation organizations that are coming together to try and figure out where do we have the best chances of resisting the complete loss of this valued species from our lakes and streams? Where are those streams that are actually projected to stay cold enough long enough? And where are those places that are actually too cold today that might actually see expanded opportunities as the temperatures warm? So that we can strategically target our limited conservation resources into those places. But they're also having to look at the other side of the coin. There are already warm water fish species moving up into our rivers and streams. And so they're having to look at what role they want to play in those transitions so that it can hopefully maximize the opportunities, be they for recreation or economic gain or for aesthetic enjoyment, while minimizing the potential for negative effects, like a complete takeover by undesirable invasive species. Another example comes from work that's being done by Eric Kallasta, a multi-generational rancher in the Big Hole River Valley of southwest Montana. Now, Eric is interested in having a financially healthy ranching operation. He also strongly values the wildlife habitat that his property provides and that his ancestors and his relatives wrote about in their family journals. Now, when I sat down with Eric to talk about the fact that climate change could bring more frequent drought, increased springtime flooding, and much lower water availability in the summer, well, I'm sure that has not been music to Eric's ears. But what I find so inspiring is that his response to that information has been to go out and do research on agricultural practices from much more arid places like Israel and Africa. And he's already beginning to experiment with some of those techniques on his property here in Montana to try and increase the chances that his ranch can stay financially healthy and continue to provide the kind of wildlife habitat that it does today long into the future. So it is my hope that more of us can sit down and ask these tough questions about what the consequences of climate change may be for things we care about, to look at those changes in a more nuanced way so that we can channel our excitement and our energy towards finding those strategies for fighting and shaping the changes that are coming our way. And it's essential that we get this hard work started now so that we can ensure there will be thriving wild and human communities, even if they look different than they do today, for the enjoyment of our future generations. Thank you.